Hey everyone, Marcus here from the Ashton Fly Shop, and today we're going to be tying a little olive mini intruder that I've been fishing, and we've been using these mini intruders from Aquaflies for quite a while, so I'm going to show you kind of the basics behind this fly. It's a little different than the one that's in the bin, but most of the concepts are really similar, so follow along with us here. So we're going to do this today on Aquafly's 26mm round eye shank. You could do it on a 32 as well, but I like the 26. And I'm going to start just behind the eye, leaving some space there, and wrap back towards the vise there. Then I'm going to use this fire line that I get from a sporting goods shop. It's just 30-pound that I use to hold the trailing hook, and just about 3 inches or so of it. Fold it back on itself. Today I'm going to have a number 2 owner hook in there, but most commonly you might see a size 4 if you were buying it in the bins. So we're just going to attach this. And as far back as you leave it is kind of your total space for the fly itself. I'm kind of liking right about there. And then I fold that braid back on itself. And every couple wraps on the way back, I pull the thread tight. It's worth noting I've got Vise gel spun 50 denier thread today. Really strong, really thin thread. But I don't have a ceramic insert on my bobbin. So anytime you're pulling on thread without a ceramic insert, just make sure that you're pulling straight down so that you don't snap it against the top end of your bobbin there. So I'm going to come back to the very back of the fly. And then I'm going to use golden brown ice dub at the rear station of this fly. Just a little pinch of it. Twist it onto the thread here so that it lays down nice and thin. And that's going to go right at the very tail end of this fly. And each turn I kind of tighten that ice dubbing, making sure that it just lays down in a nice ball, and then come to the front, go right into our dubbing loop here. Give the loop a couple twists before we hold it with our dubbing spinner. For the prop on this fly, I'm going to have brown Arctic Fox, which I'll just clip at the base, and then I'll pull the guard hairs away, leaving us with just that really furry material there. And because this is the rear prop, I'm actually going to trim some of that off. Tend to like the front prop to be bigger than the back prop, and so the back prop will probably be less than 1 inch when it's all said and done. And I'll put that Arctic Fox in my dubbing loop, making sure to line it up and space it out. And then I'm going to start spinning. Probably the most important thing with props is that you have something to pick it out, because right there it's just not going to lay down very nice. But once you pick it out, kind of pull all those fibers out, and then we start to wrap. And with this, each wrap forward, I'm going to grab these fibers and make sure they're all laying down how we want them to. My dubbing loop just popped out of the spinner. It's worth saying, anytime that happens, you can just grab it with your hackle pliers as long as you have a sturdy pair of hackle pliers because that does happen sometimes. I'm going to trap that tag in there, lock it down. And then pick this out again. Kind of secure that down. And then I'll start another loop here. Give it a couple wraps. And this one's going to hold our ostrich, which will hang over. And I've got olive ostrich from Montana Fly Company, really thin, fairly stiff ostrich that I really enjoy using. I'm just going to kind of get a good size clump of it up from the base stem. Start clipping. Kind of line up those tips right there. Slide them into the loop after I give it a couple twists here. Make sure to hold it kind of tight there. The one downside of really thin thread is what you just saw there, and it's a couple of those ostrich strands sliding through the thread because it's so thin and it doesn't grab like a thicker thread will. But as you'll see later in the fly, there's an upside to really thin thread too. So I'm going to start pulling this ostrich back. And each wrap, if fibers get caught going forward, I'm going to just gently pull them back here. And I don't mind, you know, sometimes when wrapping, you actually have to break stems back on themselves. You can. The easiest way to get away from what I've got going on right now is to use water when you're wrapping, because then it'll just naturally bend the stems. Personally, I don't mind breaking the stems just like that and laying them back in place. And I'm actually going to take some of these ostrich fibers that fell out of my loop and apply them back on top of the fly. I'll just rotate, trying to get, I've got an open spot in the fly there, so these last couple strands, I'm just gonna lay them right in there. Make sure to trap them nice and good. And then for flash in this fly, I'm going to use Ripple Ice Fiber in olive, which is a product that's kind of new to us here. It's pretty standard flash, but it has these cool wavy crinkles in it. Gives it kind of a interesting texture through the fly. So I'm going to lay half those strands on the left side of the fly and then drape them over to the right side of the fly. And it just gives a little bit of speckle through the fly. I am going to do a little bit more just because I like the way this flash looks on top and on bottom. I'm going to lay that right on top of the fly, bend these around to the bottom of the shank, and then wrap back. And I like the way that flash looks because at some angles it's really not that reflective, but then it catches light at some angles more. For the collar on the rear station, I'm going to use an olive strung Chinese saddle. And I'm actually going to use this for both parts of the fly. So the top portion of the fly, I'm just going to save the larger part of that feather right there for later. And I'm actually just going to use kind of the spiny material for the rear station. It's a nice thing to learn that you can get by with one feather for a fly instead of using two feathers. So I'm just going to tie that in at the tip. And then grab the stem here. I think I've got it. Got tied it in upside down. Take this off here. Yeah, I did. So anytime you're working with a little stem, you kind of just put it right on your thread. And it's pretty easy to trap them down. Just making sure that those thread wraps get right back to where you left off. Some of that flash caught in there. So each wrap, as I often do, I'm going to pull things back, make sure they're laying down how I want them to. And then I'm just going to hang the stem right there and tie it off. That's one way to do it right there. I'm actually going to come back onto that station with my thread a little bit just to get everything laying down. Nice and clean, just like that. Cut away some of these little stems. Do you think you have any copper Flashaboo in the kit thing? I forgot it. I think we did. Nice.
Cracked out the whip.
So now that we've got that station kind of set back the way I want it, I'm going to bring the thread all the way forward to the eye. But this distance where I've got the fire line bent back, that's going to be the working station of the body. So it's a really small bodied fly, and the body on this fly, like I often do, is going to be Flashaboo today in copper. And you can tell this Flashaboo does not belong to me because it's super neat. Belongs to the shop, because all of my Flashaboo is in a big tangled wad mess on my tying desk. Not that I need to, but I'm going to grab a fair amount of strands of this Flashaboo, lay it along the top of the shank and kind of pull it to where it's just covering our working distance here. And then to secure that, I'm going to have ultra wire and gold in case, on the off chance I ever hook a steelhead. Not that I do that very often. The body will not get super ripped up on the first fish that grabs it. So that ultra wire I'm just going to tie in right along the top of the shank. You may have noticed by now, that's also going to be the only weight in the fly. It's going to be that ultra wire. I actually really like unweighted flies this time of year. Don't seem to need to get too deep, and the depth that we need to get, I can usually just get it done by a sink tip. So I kind of just do a over and back, and then I capture all of those up at the front. And where this is sloping down right here, right where the body kind of slopes, is where the next dubbing is gonna live, so that everything is nice and even. I'll trap this wire right here. You may have noticed I'm tying with nice new scissors, and that's why I have my nice old wire cutters, so that I don't ruin my pretty new nice scissors right on the first fly that I tie. So I don't mind that that wire's kind of sticking up right there, because I'm going to use the same dubbing and just put it right over that spot. Because we have a relatively short working distance up at the front, I'm not going to do any big dubbing ball here. But that I'm doing it right where it slopes, you can see you're left with this nice even plane in the body, which I think of is the goal of an intruder body, is just to be kind of perfectly even, straight across. Even if it's wide, as long as it's flat on the top and bottom is a good idea. So I'm going to start another dubbing loop, and I'm going to go back and use the same brown Arctic fox that we used in the rear station. You will notice these are two identical stations on this fly. It just is going to be that one's going to be bigger than the other. So I'm going to leave this Arctic fox a little bit longer than the last one and a little bit more of it. Put it in my dubbing loop. Slide it down in there. I like to pull these off to the side a little bit so that they don't catch that ostrich on the back end. And that's getting a nice spin on it, and then I'm just going to pick it out. And this might actually end up being a little bit more Arctic fox than what we're looking for on this fly. We'll see how it lays down. Just as you wrap those first couple wraps, just make sure you're getting right back on that dubbing loop. Yeah, I think I will not use all of this Arctic fox. I think I'll just use just that right there. So I'm just gonna, got it secured. I'm going to clip it off. I've got a nice big front prop there. I'm going to bend it back on itself. Pick everything out. That's kind of, for a fly this size, that's as much Arctic fox as you need to prop. I'm going to start another dubbing loop. Someone sneezing out there. And I'm going to have the same MFC ostrich. Length on an intruder, I think, is totally up to preference. The way that I like mine is to have the feathers in the back be a little bit shorter than the ones in the front, so the ones in the front kind of create this umbrella over the back ones. I think the person who designed this fly actually thinks the opposite, that the back should be much longer than the front, but we're going to tie them how I want to tie them right now. So I'm going to leave these relatively long here and even up these stems. Put them in my loop. Start spinning. I've noticed with the thinner thread that you got to spin it a little bit more to get everything to stick out the way you want. I'm going to stay right on this Arctic fox. Grabbing these strands. That are going forward. Making sure to pull everything back. You'll see some of these stems stick through, and I'll actually come in and trim some of those guys off. Now, we're up at the head of the fly, and here is where I really like having thin thread, because I've got some extra things I want to put in this fly, and the thin thread allows me the freedom to get in there, get some more materials in there without building up a head that's going to compromise kind of the look of the fly. So like in my first loop, I lost just a couple of these ostrich strands, and I'm going to apply them right here to a little spot that needs them. Just going to cinch those down. Now, I do want flash in both stations on this fly. Not too much, but a couple strands that lay down on both sides here. Pull that out a little bit. Lay it on the other side of the fly. I like this flash. It kind of just has that wavy texture. Kind of helps create that little bit of an umbrella that I like to see in an intruder. And then on top of the flash, I'm going to use the last part of the saddle hackle in olive that we saved from before. So I've got the top part tied in there. I might not need to use all this feather. Yeah, it looks like I won't. Let's go for it. pull that feather tight. Grab the very top of it. Like I said, here comes the advantage of thin thread, because I can work on top of that saddle. Where with a thread that I'm often using, like a 140, I already would have bulked out here on the head. But today, I think I've got just enough room to put a couple saddles on the top of this fly. If I can find the other saddle. So, total personal preference here. My preference is to not have them hang that far over the fly. I like them more to be right in that range. So I'm gonna get these stems, get the tips to where they're pretty dang close together. And I'm gonna trim off some of these guys. Then I'm gonna lay one of these guys canted off to the left, and the other one off to the other left. Pull this one in just a little bit. Yeah. Oh. Just trying to see how these are going to lay. If you look at the top of the fly, that's about how I like them, is just a V going straight over the fly. And before I clip any stems, I'm just going to get a couple good thread wraps on there. And this guy's starting to take shape, or has taken shape, is done taking shape. So, I pull everything back. I'm not going to wrap any further back, but I am going to get some nice solid wraps on here. I like to look through the head at different angles. One of the super nice things about a rotary vise. And I just want to, it's not critical, but I like to get pretty precise and cover up any material that I'm seeing showing through this black, because I like to have a nice bold head, whether it's black or a kind of a hot color. I don't want any material showing through. So that's about right. And I'm going to grab my whip finisher here. Do one, pull it tight. There's something in there. When you have the shorter shank and a shorter working distance, it kind of makes you be a little bit more sensitive to that distance. Thinking about each thread wrap, thinking about how much material you want on the fly. For me, and where I fish on the Rogue and on the Klamath, this size range, kind of sub 3 inches, is just about right. To finish this, I've got my little antler horn bodkin here, courtesy of a good customer of ours, and loon hardhead. I'm just gonna get a little dab of that. This is one of those things where you kind of use the vise to support your hand as you do it. This is almost a little bit bigger of a dab than I want, but it's laying on nice and clean. I just don't like to, if I can avoid it, I really don't like getting any glue in the eyes of my flies. So after you get that nice circular base, kind of grab the flat part of the bodkin, work around the glue, make sure it's laying down nice and even and not sitting on the feathers. So that's about right there. So that's our little olive mini intruder. A lot of different ways to do a fly like this. This is just how I do it. Really fun to fish because you can fish it on some of the lighter rods that I really enjoy fishing, 5 weights, 4 weights. Can throw it on a Scandi line, on a 6 weight. It's just a really, being unweighted, really versatile. You can fish shallow riffles with it, but you can also put it under T11, T14 if you want to kind of dredge a run with it. So that's our olive mini intruder. Thank you very much for tuning in. Hopefully you can catch a fish on something like that.